I'm Mark Golub, and as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel, there is no one better to speak with in terms of American Jewry than the gentleman to my right, Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of American Jewish Organizations. There is literally no one on the American Jewish scene who's done more, who continues to do as much as Malcolm has done. And how long has it been now that you've been in a position here at the Conference of Presidents?
33 years at the conference, 10 years at JCRC, 7 years at the Soviet Jury Conference, and 3 years in Philadelphia at the JCRC, 2.5 years, which this year will bring it to 50 years.
Unbelievable. Anyway,
I started with my bar mitzvah, so you know.
There is no one who has done or who continues to do as much for the relationship between American Jewry and the State of Israel, and in some way defending the State of Israel, than has Malcolm Hoenlein. So it's an honor to have you with us for the 70th anniversary.
It's always my pleasure, but especially this year, which is a time when we should reflect on the incredible achievements of the State of Israel, of what has been done, of the events of 70 years ago and 75 years ago. And this year will mark the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which was really the beginning, official beginning, I would say, of the Holocaust. And you think of how much has changed, how much remains the same, how little the world has learned, how little, they are willing to confront the resurgent anti-Semitism that we see around the world and so many other things, how much indifference remains, how many people are still remain silent. And yet the State of Israel, born in 70 years ago, reborn 70 years ago, we should say, the ancient state reestablished, and all the predictions of its destruction, all of those who even in recent years talked about its isolation, talked about that it wouldn't be able to survive, that the United Nations would turn against it, that all of the countries, only the United States would stay within, and eventually they would abandon it. Look at the countries of the world, India, Asia, China, Asian, African countries, all running to Israel, seeking Israel, Arab countries, unprecedented. We visited many of them, and they all talk about how much they want Israel, Israel's technology, Israel's security, Israel's cover for them. Who could believe it? It's such a miracle that we take for granted, and we can't, we shouldn't. Because when you take the miracles for granted, they don't continue. So we should be thanking God. We should be thanking the IDF, the people of Israel, the courageous people of Israel, all of those who supported Israel, Jews and non-Jews alike. But it should spur us on this year to renew our efforts. When an eagle reaches age 35, its claws grow over so it can't grasp, and its beak so that it can't eat. And it goes off into the woods, and it scrapes off its beak and its claws, regrows them, and soars again. This is a time when we should shake off all of the shackles, all of the things of the old, and use the opportunity of the 70th anniversary to renew, to rededicate, to re-energize, to reach out to our youth, to get them to understand the miracle of Israel, not the tsaras of Israel, to understand what Israel is doing in Africa, what Israel is doing for third world nations, what Israel is doing for the world in scientific research, cancer, so many areas that it's almost hard to believe that American troops are there almost every month, training with Israel, learning from them about how to deal with urban warfare, terrorism warfare. You have Operation Juniper Cobra that just concluded. Thousands of Marines go there to train, joint exercises in missile defense, and that the countries of the world come to Israel to learn how to defend themselves. Who would have thought this a few years ago? It was impossible to believe it. And the predictions that Israel would be always the poor child. Look at it today, water independent, energy independent, a high-tech center in the world. These are things that we should remember. More people are learning and studying our heritage in all forms, and Jewish tradition, Jewish history, Jewish knowledge, than any time in Jewish history. So this is a time, step back, reflect, tell our children. You see the countries of the world, UNESCO, represented in UNESCO in the United Nations Educational Social Council, voting over and over again to deny Jewish history and Christian history, to wipe out 3,800 years of Jewish history by saying that the Kotel is not the wall. is Al Burak's wall, named for Muhammad's horse, eliminating the Jewish name altogether, moving in stages to eliminate the names of the Cave of the Patriarchs, the Rachel's tomb, the Temple Mount, because they're taking away our past to take away our future. That there's no rational reason for them to engage in these activities. And I've asked many foreign ministers from European countries who themselves are Christians, and I said, what are you going to tell your grandchildren? That you denied them the right to access to their heritage, to their sites of important religious significance to them. And they look at me and say, I have to think about that. We have to think about, what is the world trying to do? Why would they vote with all the problems in the world? They're not condemning Syria. They can vote 5 resolutions under Article 7 against Israel and the Human Rights Council. What about Iran, Sudan, Syria, Lebanon? Massive problems of the Copts, the Kurds, so many people, the Houthis, the Yazidis, and only Israel's the focus. You know what? It's not harming Israel ultimately. It harms these institutions, because Israel emerges from this stronger and more determined. And God is sending up messages, because every shovel in the ground in Israel is uncovering the proof of our past, is reminding us of our obligations to the past, to remind us of our obligations to the future. Every shovel in these postage-sized areas at the city of David, at the tunnels next to the temple, the light railroad, every shovel is uncovering things, that every single thing is consistent with Tanakh, with the Bible. Every single thing. There's not one thing that is contradictory. To find the names of biblical figures on bulai and on seals, to find where David slew Goliath, to find ancient depictions and they signs of synagogues from the early centuries, and the signs pointing Jerusalem said, only in Jerusalem are you going to have. So it's a time for us to look back in order to look forward, to look past these 70 years and be reminded of what Israel came out of, what struggles it has and continues to have to gain its legitimacy, to gain its standing in the world. But more and more people are coming to see that Israel's part of the future.
I want you to recall for us the very first time you went to Israel. What was it like? Any memory at all? What was special about it? What touched you?
For me, when I think about Israel, and my early recollections was not my own trip, but when I found the papers, and my parents showed me the papers that they filled out in Germany as they were trying to leave to go on Hakshara to Palestine in the 30s. And my mother had completed all the courses. My father, I saw all the stamps, all the things, and of course, Hitler had other things in mind, and they ended up in the United States. But their love for Israel is indescribable. When they would go to visit, they would get up at 5 in the morning and go to the Kotel, both my father and mother, and would walk together hand in hand to the Kotel. And Ephraim and Esther Hoenlein, they lived in Philadelphia all of their lives, but their hearts were always in Jerusalem, in Israel. And they were true Zionists. They were members of Mizrahi, Apollo Mizrahi. They were members of many entities there, that anything that had a connection to Israel. So I grew up in a home where any little artifact, anything, I remember them sending packages to relatives in Israel, sending them coffee and toilet paper and other things. You think about that today in the contrast to that we're getting from them, high-tech stuff. In those days, we had to send them coffee and other items that were in scarce supply. My first visit followed the Six-Day War. And during the Six-Day War, I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, and I worked at the Foreign Policy Institute as a Middle East specialist, and I took off from school with permission, and I worked on the first aid package. I worked for Robert Strauss-Hupé, who was then very influential. He was the head of the Foreign Policy Institute, and he sent a research institute, and he made all the contacts for me at that time already. So I lobbied congressmen. I went to do many things. And then the day the war ended, I left. On the last day of the war, actually. So we landed the day after the war ended. And I was taken on tours of the Sinai, and I could see that was still smoldering, the stuff. and I visited, all the fronts, and they took me because I had the credentials as a Middle East specialist, and my name wasn't particularly Jewish. When I came to one place, Ambassador Argov, who was later shot, you remember, in England, he was in charge of it for the foreign ministry, and he looked at me and he said, "You can't be Malcolm Hoenlein." I said, "I am." He said, and he looked at me, he saw my yarmulke, he saw my age, I was 21 or 22, and he said, "No, it's not possible." And he didn't want to give me my credentials because he just kept saying, "It can't be you." Later, we became the best of friends and kept in touch literally until the tragic events that brought him down, and ultimately he died from it. And I ended up sharing a room with somebody who had written a vicious attack on the program I worked at the University of Pennsylvania, the editor of Ramparts, if you remember, the extreme left paper. And because there weren't enough hotel rooms, they signed us all to rooms, and I ended up sharing them. When we walked into the room at the same time, it all became silent. Everybody, they saw this confrontation. We actually had a positive experience then. And so I was able to spend a couple of weeks touring and visiting, and then I went back again. And I had this, I saved up the money for a long time. I worked to have it. Young people today take it for granted. In our day, this was a big thing. It was something you planned and you worked at and you saved for, so that you could. There was no birthright, and I was also a leader of the World Union of Jewish Students, so I used to. And I was a member of the WCO executive because of it, and I was the vice chairman of the American Zionist Federation. So many things that brought me subsequently regularly to Israel. The next year I went, and I went from there to Famagusta, and then to Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan as an invited guest of the Arab countries on a separate passport, and eventually got stopped in Jordan, accused of being a CIA agent, Zionist spy, and everything else, and snuck out through the Mandelbaum Gate, literally. So too long a story for now. But when I came back around the Mandelbaum Gate, you had to walk a distance around. And when I came around, the Israeli soldier looked at me and he said, "I think I can say welcome home." And I fell on the ground, I kissed it, and you can't decide the sense of relief, because I was sure I was going to be shot, because I snuck through, and the guy who had arrested me was coming up there to give my name, not to let me out. It's a very long story, but very exciting one. So I had many adventures as a young person, but it was amazing how Israeli leaders accepted us, even though no matter the age. They knew me then from as I came into Soviet Jewry, and we met. We went to Israel regularly on the issues related to Soviet Jewry, and of course at JCRC. And then now, and I started the first programs bringing the public officials to Israel. Many about 40 some years ago, and people. Talk about the relationship, my experience with Israeli leaders of all kinds, left and right. And I had closest relationships, whether it was Shimon Peres, Rabin, Begin, Sharon, Shamir, all of them, because they didn't judge your label, they judged who you were. They saw our commitment to Israel. They saw that it wasn't personal, aggrandizement, and that I could work with all of them because I'm not an ideologue. I'm not ideologically oriented. I'm not party affiliated. I really believe in Klal Yisrael, which is why I spent all my years in umbrella organizations, though it's not easy, but because I believe in bringing the unity of the Jewish people to fruition, that is the one precondition to every great miracle that happened to the Jewish people. And unity means also between Israel and the United States, American Jewry and diaspora Jewry generally, with the people of Israel, to build bridges of understanding. The leaders of Israel are far more concerned and committed to diaspora Jewry than they are given credit, and that was everybody. Some more openly expressed it, some more quietly expressed it, but I can tell you things that Yitzhak Rabin, who was not the most communicative, would take me in a corner and say, and sometimes I would get calls at night from Prime Minister's office when the Prime Minister would say something that he didn't want to get out and ask me to do. And today I enjoy relations, and we just came back from a mission, the biggest mission we ever had to Israel, of 140 people. We met every leader of a major party, and people saw the warmth, and they commented to us. They say, you know, that they saw everybody hugged us, everybody walked in and showed real warmth and appreciation. So the divisions are really artificial to a degree. Sure, there are ideological positions, there are religious differences, there are differences on principle, and we should respect that and recognize it. But what unites us far overwhelms that. And the importance of Israel to each of us. And none of us has a right to denigrate Israel's security, Israel's standing. We can disagree with it. You can criticize some of the policies of Israel, and it doesn't make you an anti-Semite or even anti-Israel. But to deny its right, to endanger it, we do not have that right. And we are not equal partners. We are shareholders in Israel. If you live there and you send your children to fight, and if you pay half your income in taxes, then you're an equal partner with Israel. And I hope that Israelis are sensitive to the opinions and to the concerns of the vast majority, and all the efforts to educate them are very important. But the 70th year should be a time of rededication. It should be a time when everybody says and looks back at the successes, what we can learn from the past, so that we can have a more secure future. One last word. You know, the Torah describes two kinds of inheritance, a Yerusha and a Morasha. A Yerusha is something rich uncle leaves you. You can do with it what you want. A Morasha is given to you in trust. And two things are called a Morasha. Torah, our heritage, our history, our values, and Israel. That it's given to us in trust for future generations, that they're not endangered things, that we should enhance them and make sure that future generations. So we have to teach them the beauty, the celebration of being a Jew, the incredible achievements of the state of Israel, and what it means for us to have that, and to be the generation that has witnessed all of these incredible miracles that we take for granted.
As you look at the sweep of Israeli history over 70 years, what do you think the most significant moment in Israeli history has been? Is there a defining moment? Is there a moment that somehow changed Israeli life and the course of Israeli history? If there's not one, is there two? Are there two? What is the one or two most significant moments of Israeli history over the first 70 years? And again, you don't have to limit it to one or two, but you understand the question. What are the critical moments?
This requires an hour. Because if you literally think back over the 70 years, there have been so many watersheds, so many critical developments. Certainly the Six-Day War in my lifetime was something beyond imagination, and I regret that young people today can't see it, can't experience it. I think the euphoria was only one part of it, but the miracle, the unity that it brought, not only within the Jewish community, but people of every kind. I was at the foreign policy, and people would line up there to tell me, I'm ready to help. Tell me, non-Jews, what I can do, how I can help. People stop me in the streets. They would write me. And I did a lot of media appearances. We would get flooded with messages from non-Jews as well as Jews saying, I want to help, I want to help. And the spirit, I wish I could capture just the spirit and the unity of that time. Second, the Soviet Jewry movement, where we showed that we learned the lesson of never again, that we would not be silent in the face of the suffering of Jews or non-Jews.
Is that Israeli history?
That is absolutely. Israel was the critical factor in the creation of the Soviet Jewry movement, and I'm proud to say it, I can tell it to you. We would not have had the successes had it not been for the motivation, the assistance, commitment of the people of Israel. And if we didn't have Israel that would fight for them to go, because it was a movement of repatriation. What separated us from the dissidents was we weren't saying they were rejecting the Soviet Union, saying we want to be repatriated to our homeland. You recognize that? You talk about the Jews in that way. So we're just saying repatriate them to Israel. And and then all of the movements. And again, we are in a sense a victim of our successes when we rescued Syrian Jews and Iranian Jews and Yemeni Jews and Iraqi Jews and Ethiopian Jews. Causes that really unified people. That you saw the Achdut, the unity of Jewish people expressed in amazing ways. The Soviet Jewry movement, people gave up their whole lives. They devoted every minute on the grassroots levels. I know people lost their jobs because they had been so involved in Soviet Jewry, and how there wasn't anything. One time, a cab driver, I remember, asked me, where in Russia are your parents from? And I said, no, they were not. They're from Germany. He said, really? And do you have relatives? I said, no. He said, why do you do this? And I realized that the world doesn't have that sense of arivut, of responsibility for one another, and the feeling. And we did an event where we took over an island behind the UN when Khrushchev came to speak. There's a little outcropping in the East River. And as they were going out there, Percy Sutton, who was the black borough president of Manhattan, and Bob Abrams was the borough president of Brooklyn, and Sister Rose was on this little boat, and others, and we got tangled up in the weeds as we approached it. And Percy Sutton raised his well-cuffed shirt and and untangled the thing. And a reporter yelled from the boat, Mr. Sutton, isn't there anything you won't do for Soviet Jews? And he just looked up and he said, no. And that was really the spirit of, and that captured people's imagination. It was a model of people coming together. We had blacks for Soviet Jewry, lawyers for Soviet Jewry, everybody, Hispanics for Soviet Jewry. But if Jews had to be there first. So the world looks to us to set the standard and to set the message. And when it comes to Israel, the same thing is true. After the Yom Kippur War, who was in a synagogue that didn't start praying with such fervor and that they hadn't seen her and cried and raced home and wanted to hear what happened and identify her? When, God forbid, there's an incident, we'd still see the reaction permeates not only the Jewish community, but millions, tens of millions of non-Jews around the world as well who reacted. That 70% of the American people stand with Israel today. It's 64% in the polls, the Gallup poll. And these are incredible numbers. You'd think after all of the negative publicity, all the media distortions, misrepresentations, and the BDS campaigns and all the hostility, it's true we have problems in certain sectors and we have to work on them and address them. But overall, American people get it. They understand. They understand why Israel is important to America, not just why America is important to Israel. It's why members of Congress vote overwhelmingly to support Israel. It's not because there's a pernicious lobby or there's other things. It's because they share the values and the norms and the aspirations. And we see it so clearly today. So when I look over the 7 years, I can think of so many highlights. Israel's energy and water independence shapes its security as much as the IDF and other things will do. That it could create high-tech industry, in part because of the Russian Jewish immigration, in part because the IDF, very creative approach with Shimon and Matayim and all the other units that do remarkable things. So there were also negative points. The assassination of Rabin, I think, was a terrible point in the history of Israel. There were other things, but I think you can look back in the 70 years and say that there are so many important points where Israel's leadership was critical to the diaspora. The diaspora remains a critical partner for Israel, and we should look to the future to find ways that we enhance each other and build for each other because we have a common future. We have one faith and one fate, and what happens to one part of us affects us all. Israel will be the majority of the Jewish people. It will increasingly be more important as the center of Jewish life. That doesn't denigrate the existence of diaspora communities. It enhances it if we do it right.
I want you to comment very briefly on two moments that are probably not the highlights of the history of Israel, but they are significant. One is Entebbe, and the other is the decision by the Trump administration to formally recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. How do you rate those? What, to you, did they have a meaning and a power? And if so, explain what that is.
those are two very important events for different reasons. Entebbe was a remarkable achievement, and despite the distortions of the latest films about it, I was actually on the way back to New York when we were coming from the mountains where I'd been speaking at an event, and was going the next day onto the U.S. aircraft carrier where the president and many, many leaders were. And the pride with which people came there. But it was universal. It wasn't just the Jews. Everybody was elevated by what Israel was able to pull off. And the regrettable death of Yoni, Netanyahu, etc., was mourned. But it was a statement about Israel also of never again. And for us, never again should be a pledge that every generation takes anew. And it means that we will not stand by. And that is why we speak out when Yazidis are in trouble, or other Copts are in trouble, or Kurds are in trouble, or others, and they say, you know, you're the only one speaking out. When Maronites, when others were, you know, Christians, Muslims, anything. But never again means that we don't, because it has no boundaries. Once hate is allowed to establish itself, once indifference reigns, it affects everybody. There's no border, there's no fence, there's nothing that can stop it. And first and foremost, we have to fight the anti-Semitism that's resurgent today. And Entebbe was a symbol of Jews standing up and defending themselves and saying we can't rely on the world, but we have to rely on ourselves, first and foremost, and then on our friends. The significance of the recognition of Jerusalem. For me, Jerusalem has a special place. I love Jerusalem with all my body and soul, and we pray that we shall return, not because of tzaras and not because we're running away, but barachamim, out of mercy and joy and happiness, that we come back to Jerusalem. And I walk the streets every time. It's a thrill. It's renewed. I go many, many times a year. It never diminishes. But I will tell you something, that I think the president's visit was more important than his declaration, the visit to the wall. And when he walked up there, and I was invited to be there together with 5 or 6 people, and it was the first time you saw the Kotel without a single person. It was astonishing. I have those pictures, and I periodically look at it. First of all, it was stunning to see it. It's so pristine. But then when there were some people there, a very small number, and I went because I wanted to see how he reacted and the dynamic of the event. And I watched him then walk up to the Kotel, put on a yarmulke, and read from the Psalms, and declare that this is a Jewish holy site after UNESCO said it's only Al-Burak's wall named for Muhammad's horse. To me, that was a more important declaration, or as important as the declaration about the embassy, because the embassy was a statement. And it's a build. This was a reassertion of history, of the legitimacy of Israel's claim of the United States, saying to the world, we recognize the reality, the truth of Israel's history, of its claims, of its rights. It doesn't denigrate anybody else's right. It doesn't diminish anybody else's right. But the most important part was there wasn't a single demonstration. This was such an important statement on his part, and there wasn't one demonstration in the Arab world. So it shows that the demonstrations were incited, that they had to be stimulated. You say Al-Aqsa is under siege. As Abbas well knows, there's nothing that rallies the people and roils them more than you say Al-Aqsa is under siege when it never was. And people pay with their lives for it. For nothing, because he wants to divert attention, because he wants to incite. And here the president made this declaration, so it shows that it's how you do it and what you do and the standing up for it. What is the message that the world saw from that moment? And when the United States stands with Israel in the United Nations, and when we declare that we're not going to tolerate anymore the bigotry, the bias, the hatred that is manifest in the international forum. So moving the embassy is a very important statement because it's justice. It's a statement of what is right. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't move a boundary. It doesn't do anything. It's in West Jerusalem. They can put up a plaque and that will be it. You know that we, and I will say to a large degree I, together with Senator Moynihan, pushed the 1995 bill that declared Jerusalem the capital of Israel. the Jerusalem law. We worked on it for a long time, and I keep mentioning it because Senator Moynihan deserves a lot of the credit. And there were others too, and many members of Congress, Senator Lieberman, and others who joined in that effort. And I went to Prime Minister Rabin, and I told him that I was doing this. And he said, if you get this passed, I will come for the signing. I said, Mr. Prime Minister, is that a promise? He said, yes. The night before the vote, I called him, and they put me through, and I said, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm collecting on the promise, because tomorrow this is going to pass. And we're going to have an event in the rotunda of the United States Capitol, if you come. He came. And he said, he gave a speech about my Jerusalem, which we have available. And he talked about what it meant to him. And he told me afterwards, he put his arms around me, which one of his aides said to me, I've been with him for decades. He's never once hugged me, let alone say, this was really terrific. It was one of the proudest days of my life. And it was only a short time before his assassination. And there's never been another event in the rotunda of the United States. No event since then. That was the last one. And we had messages from all the leadership, Republican, Democrat, all the top leadership, President Clinton, everybody sent messages, and he allowed the law to go into effect. So naming the embassy is only implementing what has been American law for 20 years. And what is more of a just statement than recognizing 3,300 years or 3,400 years since King David made Jerusalem the capital of the Jewish people, and all you do is acknowledge that the embassy of the United States and the embassy of every other country belongs there. It's just historic justice. It's just a correction of a distortion that was imposed because of the threats of other parties. And one day, I'm saying, you will see Arab embassies. So buy real estate in Jerusalem, because they're all going to be looking for places to build there. I went to Guatemala. I met the president. I'm going to Honduras soon. We know other countries I don't want to mention because I don't want to spook it, but there are 7, 8, 9, 10 countries that are already working on moving their embassies, or have talked to us about moving their embassies, because they know it's the right thing. And it's time that that historic injustice was righted, and I think President Trump will be remembered for having made that move.
Okay, personally, who are the heroes, the Israeli heroes, that have touched you the most? And I think right away you knew all the prime ministers. They're not the only ones you knew. You've known presidents of Israel and others who've made marvelous contributions. My instinct is to say to you, as you look at the range of individuals who served as prime minister, but anyone in public life, are any of them especially dear to you? Are any of them, in your mind, heroes to you, Malcolm Hoenlein?
I would say every one of them, in some respect, was a hero. I knew everybody, especially from Begin on, very closely. Begin was a unique individual. And I used to go and visit him when he was out of office in a hotel here, when everybody ignored him. And he never forgot it. And the same with Sharon when he was out of office. And Mrs. Sharon said, you're amongst the few. And I say to myself, what do you mean? What did I do? Here's a guy who was a hero, put his life on the line, did so much. Shimon Peres, who people like to criticize. I tell them, did you build the Mona? Did you start the idea? Did you contribute what this man did, how he changed Israel? You don't like his politics, you don't think, but look what he did. And I had an extremely close relationship with him. So across the board, I have to say that they more than reciprocated whatever affection, trust, and confidence that I had, that they expressed, much to the chagrin of some people who didn't understand it and say, it's Hoenlein, it's this, it's that, it's views. But they got it. There were many ministers of defense, Moshe Aarons, people like that, who I went with him to see the Lavi. It went right through my heart. And many of the others, many of the generals, the unsung generals, who doing such incredible things, the creativity, how they often worked with limited resources, the chesed, the people who are doing so much every day, who put their lives on the line to bring help, support, especially during the war, going there under fire. You see Hasidim, you see Haredim, you see secular people working together, doing things. I witnessed sometimes things where people, they would come to a store to buy some food, and the guy would ask, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm taking the troops," and they would dump everything into the truck that they have. I mean, these people can't afford, but it was the universal feeling when a tragedy struck. How many people rallied around the families of the three boys? I went to the funeral, and I walked with people like Rick Jacobs and others from across the spectrum. Because we all identified with them. They're our boys. They're our the children were the children of the Jewish people and of the people of Israel. So there are so many people who are often not the ones whose name appear in the press, who make the miracles possible, who do the things day to day quietly. I think of Uri Lubrani, who just passed away, ambassador to Iran, ambassador in Lebanon, the guy who rescued Ethiopian Jews, who worked with us on Iranian Jews. I worked with him on so many things over the years. A great hero, modest man, who passed away in '91, just recently. And there are so many like that who gave their lives for the Jewish people and the Jewish state. They're the unsung heroes of the Jewish people. And there are many of them, and we should appreciate them. Those that are living, we should reach out to them. Rav Steinman and many other rabbis that I had great respect for. And many people from all spectrum of Jewish life, of religious life. And it doesn't mean they have to agree on everything, but you see their commitment, their dedication, the devotion, how they conducted themselves, what they gave, how much they sacrificed. And it should bring us together. It should unite us around these people that have done so much and have earned the right to have the respect of all Jews and people around the world. And for us to try to emulate that in what we do as we move from the 70th towards the 120 and 200 and 2000th anniversary.
Malcolm, what is it that you wish Americans in general, American Jews in particular, understood most about Israel as it turns 70? What's the message you'd like them to hear from Israel through you? And then what do you say to the JBS audience personally as they celebrate with you, with us, the 70th birthday of Israel?
You think I can remember all of that? And I do know that the JBS audience is uniquely committed. It's why they watch. But I hear from them, and I meet people in the street, and they will tell me, and that these are the best of our people. And I want American Jews to know that you can't take Israel for granted, because if you do, we will lose it. Every day we have to renew our commitment. We have to get up in the morning and say, is Israel still there? Look at the overwhelming challenges Israel faces. You have 150,000 missiles in Israel's north. You have 100,000 missiles in Israel's south. You have Iran encroaching on the border with Syria, all along the border of Jordan and Syria, with 80,000 militia, Shiite militia. You have the IRGC, the Iran Revolutionary Guard. You have so many others there. You see the growing threat of Khamenei to destroy Israel, the increasing threats. And take it for real. The lesson of history is when they threaten to destroy us, they mean it. And we have to be prepared to counter it. So it means that we have to rally and be united against the threat posed by Iran, increasingly by Turkey, by others, as they redraw the Middle East, and I think in ways that will affect us for generations to come. We see Russia expanding its footprint in the region, and the friendly regimes being threatened and trying to undermine them. So we can't become complacent because Israel is stronger and Israel can defend itself. If you look at the aspirations of the extremist regimes, the rogue governments, the Khamenei's and others, you realize that there's one thing blocking their aspirations, and that's that little state of Israel whose name hardly fits on the map. And it is the model to other countries in the Middle East. They say that's what we want. We want an economy like that. We want to be strong like that. We want to have high tech. We want our children committed. We want to grow. So American Jews should help. They should be inspired. They should inspire. We should increase trips like Birthright, but also make sure there's the right kind of follow-up. We have to deal with the question of assimilation and the indifference that we find amongst our young people, let alone the increasing hostility on our campuses because they fall victim to extremist professors or movements because they don't know and they don't have the confidence in their ability to respond to these false charges, to these allegations, to these libels. And so we have to do more, start younger, start in kindergarten, start in elementary schools, educate our kids. Parents take time, explain to them what they see on television, give them the context to understand what this is about. Talk about Israel's amazing contributions, about what Israeli society is about, what they have done to improve the lives of people through pharma, through medtech, through incredible discoveries in their hospitals, the number of the inventions second only to the United States and listings, etc. To tell the positive story of Israel to them, to give them a sense that Israel is not just about wars, because that's what they see. They see the negatives on television, and nobody sits with an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old to explain it to them. And we pay the price 10 years later. So we have to inoculate our kids younger and younger. And parents, take them to Israel, but that's not enough. You can't just send them on a birthright trip when they're 18 and ignore them the first 17 years of their life and think that they're going to be prepared then for what they're going to encounter. We win most often on campuses on BDS, but our kids are affected by it. They see the propaganda, they see the hatred, and they can get turned off. We see that they don't so much turn against Israel as they turn towards indifference. Indifference in general, but also in regard to Israel. If they're indifferent to politics in general, it's not good, but it's not a loss. We can't afford to lose them in support of Israel and support of the causes we care about. So educate the young people. Let each find the way to relate. It's not one single, I call it the smorgasbord approach, that you give the sampling and they will find one thing that they like. And once they bring it in and you can talk to them and help educate them and attract them, there's something for everybody in Israel, for every young person, for every older person. And visit, help build up Israel, expand the ties, lobby your congressmen, speak to them, educate them, because they too don't know. They have a million issues to deal with. As if we approached you about issues in southern Sudan or Northern Ireland, you wouldn't know the details. The same way, there's no reason to expect that they do, except to the degree that we educate them, we inform them. And when you see Arab leaders willing to stand up to defend Israel, when speaking about the relationships, not backing off anymore from hosting Jewish groups and others, which they know how that will be interpreted. We have to do more to get our young people to understand the relationship to Israel, what Israel has to offer them, and what they have to offer Israel. We have to stand up against anti-Semitism wherever it manifests itself, not just in Europe, in the United States. There has to be zero tolerance. And any place it rears its ugly head, Jewish communities have to go on those campuses or in those cities. We have to demand that law enforcement, governments, legislators, everybody takes every step necessary, that it is not tolerable. Martin Luther King said, we won't be judged by the attacks of our enemies, but by the silence of our friends. Too often people have been silent in the face of anti-Semitism. A congressman can be seen with a vicious anti-Semite, that they can get away with saying things in the media that they wouldn't dare say about others. We have to make sure that there is zero tolerance. No more. Never again says we will not be silent in the face of these attacks against our people, whether individuals or collectively. We will hold our media and all media to account for the truth. That's all we want. Israel's strongest weapon is the truth. It's not perfect. It's not Disneyland. Sometimes it's Neverland. It's not Disneyland. And it has flaws. But look at it compared to any country, especially one facing the challenges that it does. The humanity, the way it reaches out, that took in thousands and thousands of Syrians. I went to the border at 4 a.m. It was freezing cold, and I saw young Israeli soldiers crossing the border at the risk of their lives to bring Syrian babies and families and adults, hulking adults, for treatment in Israel. 6,000 perhaps. And they continue now. They're building in Syria clinics And they provide them with hundreds of tons of clothing, of food. Where's the United Nations saying this? Where's anybody paying recognition? Is any other country doing the same? Especially with the limited resources that Israel has? And putting all of these things to people who one day may turn against them. And I asked the general in charge, a colonel in charge, when I saw these 4 big guys, and I said, but aren't you concerned that one day they will turn against you? And he said, most likely, but that's what Jews do. And that's what Israelis do. So we, recognizing our past, our responsibilities to the past, to our grandparents and their grandparents, and our responsibilities to our grandchildren and their grandchildren, that we protect Israel, that we protect our heritage, that we keep our young, that we bring them into the community, that we not lose any more. We can't afford the attrition here or anywhere in the world, that we stand together as Am Echad, B'Lev Echad, as one people with one heart, and we will overcome all the challenges.
You know, Malcolm and I go way, way back. I think the first time we were together, and for all I know, it was earlier than that.
You both had much more hair.
But, you know, I look at you. You haven't aged at all. You're remarkable. Anyway, you were then working with Yehuda Hellman, and it was the funeral service that the Conference of Presidents held for Menachem Begin. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do. But also I think we worked after the Sadat signing at the hotel, when all 3,000 people came together.
You remember that?
I do remember.
That was an extraordinary evening, wasn't it?
It was the most amazing.
This was Menachem Begin spoke.
The chairman of the conference then was Alex Schindler, Reform Movement, who had embraced and showed the model for how somebody from the Reform Movement, et cetera, from the, let's say, the left of center, embraced Menachem Begin because he said it was the importance of the unity, and the two forged a friendship until their deaths.
Remarkable, yes.
That was really remarkable.
And Alex Schindler, who, again, he was the chairman of the conference at that point in time, he really paved the way for Begin to be accepted by American Jews.
Right.
Okay, but we've been together ever since, and then shortly thereafter you became executive vice chairman yourself, and I've had the privilege not only of watching the extraordinary work you've done for how many decades it's been now, doesn't matter, but also being your friend, and how very, very, very good you've been to me and all of my attempts to do L'chaim and then to do Shalom TV and then to do JBS, and you have been with me every step of the way. And I want the audience to understand, you are not an Israeli citizen, but I know how Israel feels about you. You are an Israeli. You are a Jew in the finest sense of what that means. You're a Jew of the world. You're an Ohev Yisrael. You are somebody who, you live in America, but you live wherever Jews are in need. And you have been the consummate, not only defender of the state of Israel, but one who builds the relationship between American Jewry and Israel, and American Jewry and Jews all over the world who are in need. Wherever Jews are in need, Malcolm, that's where you've gone. And you have been one of the heroes of modern Jewish life. You are my hero. I love you more than I can ever explain. And so for me, you share a special way in the 70th birthday. This is the birthday of something you have made sure we have as a gift for ourselves and for, as you say, our children and our grandchildren. It should be forever and ever. Amen v'amen. But happy birthday, Malcolm, on Israel's 70th birthday. Love you very much.
And it's more than mutual, much more than mutual, but I want a guarantee from you that we will do the interview for the 80th and the 90th. The 100th, we'll see.
It's a deal.
Good.
We're right here. Mark Golub with Malcolm Hoenlein here on JBS. As always, be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.